Picture this. Two men, same age, similar careers, both intelligent and capable. One walks into a room and you feel his presence immediately. There's something about him, a lightness, an ease, a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to prove anything. The other man shuffles in looking exhausted, shoulders slightly hunched, carrying invisible weight that everyone can sense but nobody mentions. The difference between them isn't money or status or even physical appearance. The difference is that one man is unmarried and the other isn't. Nietzsche spent his life observing human nature with brutal honesty, and one of his most controversial insights was this: the man who remains free from the domesticating forces of marriage and family maintains a vitality, a will to power, a capacity for self-overcoming that married men systematically lose. What I'm about to reveal will make some people furious because it challenges the fundamental narrative our society is built on. But if you're ready to see clearly, if you're willing to question everything you've been told about what makes a successful life, then pay close attention, because this will change how you see every interaction, every choice, every path forward. Nietzsche talked constantly about the Ubermensch, the superior individual who creates his own values, rather than accepting what society hands him. The unmarried man who consciously chooses his path embodies this concept more fully than most people ever will. He's looked at the conventional script, marriage and children and suburban life, and he said no, not because he can't achieve it, because he's evaluated it honestly and found it wanting. This requires a level of intellectual independence and courage that most people simply don't possess. It's easier to follow the herd, to do what everyone else does, to accept that the wisdom of the masses must be correct. The unmarried man has rejected that easy path and chosen something harder and lonelier, but ultimately more authentic. Watch how the unmarried man carries himself physically. His posture is different. He doesn't have the defeated slump of the married man who spent 20 years being slowly ground down by obligations and compromises. His shoulders are back, his head is up. His movements have an ease and confidence that comes from being fundamentally at peace with his choices. Nietzsche understood that the body expresses what the mind believes. The unmarried man's body expresses sovereignty. The married man's body expresses servitude, even if he'd never admit that's what he feels. The energy differential is immediately obvious once you know what to look for. The unmarried man has vitality. He's interested in life, engaged with possibilities, animated by projects and pursuits that matter to him. The married man is tired. Not just physically, though, that's part of it. He's tired in his soul, tired of negotiating, tired of compromising, tired of pretending that his life is fulfilling when it mostly feels like an endless series of obligations. Nietzsche called this slave morality, the acceptance of weakness and suffering as virtuous, rather than something to be overcome. The married man has convinced himself that his exhaustion is noble sacrifice. The unmarried man simply refuses to participate in that particular delusion. Think about how each man approaches new opportunities. Someone mentions an interesting project, a potential adventure, a chance to try something different. The unmarried man's immediate response is to evaluate whether it interests him. Does he want to do this? Does it align with his goals and values? If yes, he's in. If no, he declines. Simple. The married man's response is completely different. His first thought is whether his wife will approve, whether it conflicts with family obligations, whether it's acceptable given his role as husband and father. He's not evaluating the opportunity itself. He's evaluating whether he's allowed to pursue it. One man is free. The other is seeking permission. That difference defines everything. Nietzsche believed that most people live in what he called resentment, a deep resentment toward those who are free and powerful, masked as moral superiority. The married man often exhibits this toward unmarried men. He can't admit that he might have made a poor choice, so instead he frames the unmarried man's freedom as immaturity or selfishness. He needs to believe that his own suffering and constraint are somehow more virtuous than the unmarried man's autonomy and vitality. This psychological mechanism protects his ego, but prevents him from seeing reality clearly. The unmarried man, having no such need for self-deception, simply lives his life and lets the married man cope however he needs to. The creative force that Nietzsche called the will to power flows differently in unmarried versus married men. The unmarried man directs this force toward his own becoming, his own projects, his own self-overcoming. He's constantly evolving, constantly pushing himself toward new capabilities and achievements. The married man's creative force is drained off into family maintenance. His will to power gets sublimated into providing and protecting. He's no longer becoming himself. He's becoming what his family needs him to be. Over decades, this creates completely different human beings. One is becoming more himself, the other is becoming less. Before we go further, drop your city in the comments. I want to know where my fellow truth seekers are located across the globe. Let's build this community. The morning sets the tone for everything, and here the difference is stark. The unmarried man wakes up and his first hour belongs entirely to him. He can think his own thoughts, pursue his own practices, prepare for his day according to his own priorities. His morning builds him up. The married man wakes up and is immediately in service mode. Wife needs attention. Children need care. Household needs managing. His morning depletes him before his day has even begun. Nietzsche understood that energy is everything, that the Ubermensch maintains his vital force rather than letting it be drained by others' demands. One man conserves and builds his energy. The other starts every day already in deficit. The philosophical question of freedom versus security lies at the heart of this difference. Nietzsche saw that most people trade freedom for security, then spend their lives trying to convince themselves they made a good deal. The married man has traded the uncertainty and loneliness of freedom for the supposed security and companionship of marriage. But what has he actually received? He's traded one form of insecurity for another. Now, instead of being alone, he's in a relationship that could end painfully. Instead of only worrying about his own survival, he's responsible for others' well-being. The security is largely illusory, but the freedom is definitively gone. The unmarried man faces his existential aloneness directly, rather than trying to escape it through relationship. Nietzsche would recognize this as a more honest and courageous position. Yes, you're alone in the universe. Yes, ultimately nobody can truly understand or save you. The unmarried man accepts this and builds a life on that foundation. The married man tries to deny it through partnership, creating elaborate illusions of permanent connection that will eventually be revealed as temporary. When death comes, we all go alone anyway. The unmarried man has lived with that truth. The married man has hidden from it. The financial dimension reveals another aspect of this regal bearing. The unmarried man experiences his money as genuinely his. He earns it, he keeps it, he deploys it according to his judgment. This creates a very different relationship with resources than the married man has. The married man earns money that's immediately claimed by family needs. He has higher income but less actual wealth, because everything gets consumed by the household. He can't make significant financial decisions without consensus. He's economically constrained despite often earning more than the unmarried man. The unmarried man with modest income lives better, because what he earns serves his purposes alone. This economic sovereignty contributes to his kingly bearing. He's not begging for permission to spend his own money. Nietzsche's concept of master morality versus slave morality illuminates this perfectly. Master morality is defined by self-determination, by the powerful individual deciding for himself what is good and bad, based on what enhances life and power. Slave morality is defined by resentment of the powerful, by calling weakness strength and strength arrogance. The unmarried man operates from master morality. He determines his own values and lives by them without apology. The married man has usually accepted slave morality. He calls his constraint responsibility, and the unmarried man's freedom selfishness. He needs to believe this because accepting the reverse would be too psychologically painful. The social presence of these men differs dramatically. The unmarried man enters social situations without agenda. He's not trying to prove anything or maintain any particular image. He can be genuinely himself because he's not managing anyone else's perception of his life choices. This authenticity is magnetic. People are drawn to those who are genuinely comfortable in their own skin. The married man at the same gathering is often subtly performing successful husband, performing good father, performing satisfied with his choices. This performance creates a barrier between him and genuine connection. People can sense the inauthenticity even if they can't articulate what they're detecting. The intellectual life available to each man shapes their very consciousness. Nietzsche believed that great thinking required solitude and freedom from petty concerns. The unmarried man has both. He can spend hours in sustained contemplation. He can read difficult texts that require complete focus. He can think dangerous thoughts without worrying about how they'll affect his family's social position. His mind remains sharp and flexible because it's used for actual thinking, rather than just logistical management. The married man's intellect atrophies, not because he's less capable, but because he has no time or mental space for serious intellectual work. His mind becomes a calendar and task list rather than a tool for understanding reality. The capacity for self-overcoming, which Nietzsche considered the highest human activity, is vastly greater in the unmarried man. Self-overcoming requires that you can actually change, that you can become something different from what you are. The married man is locked into his role. He can't fundamentally transform because too many people depend on the current version of him. The unmarried man can become whoever he decides to become. He can change careers, relocate, adopt new practices, transform his entire life. This capacity for reinvention keeps him psychologically alive and growing. The married man stagnates because transformation is foreclosed by his obligations. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence thought experiment asks, could you live the same life over and over forever and say yes to it? The unmarried man who's built his life well can answer yes. He's living according to his own values, pursuing his own goals, experiencing his own choices. Repeating it forever would be acceptable because it's genuinely his. The married man often cannot honestly answer yes. He's living a life that was imposed by biology and social expectation, more than chosen by conscious will. The idea of repeating it forever is horrifying rather than acceptable. This difference in basic relationship to one's own existence shapes everything else. The physical health and vitality maintained by the unmarried man contributes to his regal bearing. He has time to exercise, money for quality food, mental space to prioritize wellness. His body remains capable and attractive because he treats it well. The married man's body deteriorates under chronic stress and neglect. He doesn't have time for proper exercise. He eats convenient garbage because there's no time for better. He sacrifices sleep to manage all his obligations. By middle age, the physical difference between these men is often dramatic. One still moves like a vital human. The other moves like someone defeated by life. The body doesn't lie about how someone is actually living. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, love of fate, love of one's own life exactly as it is, becomes accessible to the unmarried man in ways the married man rarely achieves. To truly love your fate, you need to feel that it's yours, that you chose it, that it reflects your values and will. The unmarried man's life is his own creation. He can love it because he made it. The married man's life is a negotiated compromise between his desires and everyone else's needs. How can you love a fate you didn't really choose, that was imposed by biology and social pressure? The unmarried man walks through life with the confidence of someone who owns his existence. The married man carries the subtle shame of someone living someone else's life. The aesthetic dimension of existence matters more than most people recognize. Nietzsche believed that life should be lived as art, that we should create beauty in how we exist. The unmarried man can craft his life aesthetically. His home reflects his taste. His daily routine has elegance. His choices create a coherent narrative rather than chaotic compromise. The married man's aesthetic life is destroyed by family needs. His home is functional chaos. His routine is dictated by others' schedules. The beauty is stripped out by practical necessity. Over time, living in aesthetic poverty affects the soul. The unmarried man surrounds himself with beauty he's chosen. The married man exists in environments he tolerates rather than loves. The relationship with time reveals fundamental differences in how these men experience existence. Nietzsche understood that time is our most precious resource, that how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. The unmarried man experiences time as abundant. He has enough time for what matters to him because his time is his own. He can invest hours in pursuits that build mastery. He can waste time occasionally without guilt. His relationship with time is sovereign rather than desperate. The married man experiences chronic time scarcity. There's never enough time for everything demanded of him. He's always behind, always rushing, always sacrificing something important because other things are more urgent. This desperation around time creates an entirely different quality of daily experience. The spiritual possibilities available to the unmarried man align with Nietzsche's vision of self-overcoming and transcendence. Though Nietzsche himself was critical of traditional religion, he understood the human need for something beyond mundane existence. The unmarried man can pursue spiritual practices seriously. He can meditate for hours. He can attend retreats. He can restructure his entire life around spiritual development if that calls to him. The married man cannot do this without abandoning his responsibilities. His spiritual life, if it exists at all, is squeezed into moments stolen from family time. The depth of spiritual development possible differs enormously between someone who can dedicate serious time and energy versus someone grabbing moments here and there. Nietzsche's idea of creating new values rather than accepting inherited ones requires the freedom to think differently than the herd. The unmarried man has this freedom. He can question everything, including the fundamental value of marriage and family. He can arrive at different conclusions than mainstream society and live according to those conclusions. The married man has already committed to conventional values by choosing marriage. He can't question them too deeply without undermining his own life choices. This creates intellectual constraint. The unmarried man can think freely because his life doesn't depend on maintaining any particular belief system. The adventure available throughout life keeps the unmarried man psychologically vital. Nietzsche valued the adventurous spirit, the willingness to risk and explore and push boundaries. The unmarried man can say yes to adventure at any age. He can take a sabbatical to travel the world at 45. He can learn dangerous new skills at 50. He can relocate to a foreign country at 60. Nothing prevents him from continued exploration and growth. The married man becomes increasingly risk-averse and routine-bound. His life becomes smaller each year rather than larger. By the time he reaches old age, he's often just waiting to die rather than still actively engaged with life's possibilities. The professional trajectory differs dramatically based on freedom to take risks and make bold moves. Nietzsche understood that greatness requires the willingness to fail spectacularly. The unmarried man can take career risks that married men cannot. He can start businesses that might fail. He can switch industries entirely. He can take positions that pay less but offer more growth potential. He can negotiate aggressively because he can walk away. The married man is locked into safe, steady employment. He can't risk the family's security on ventures that might not work. This risk aversion ensures he'll never achieve extraordinary professional outcomes. The unmarried man's willingness to risk creates opportunities for exceptional results. Nietzsche's concept of the eternal return asks what you would choose if you could live your life again, knowing everything you know now. The unmarried man often wishes he could live it again exactly the same, maybe make it even more his own. The married man often wishes he could have different knowledge at 25, wishes he'd understood what he was getting into before committing. This fundamental difference in whether you'd choose your life again, if given the option, reveals everything about whether someone is living authentically or living according to external script. The sensual and erotic dimension of life remains open to the unmarried man in ways foreclosed to married men. Nietzsche celebrated the Dionysian, the passionate and sensual aspects of existence. The unmarried man can pursue passionate encounters throughout his life. He can experience variety and novelty, and the intoxication of new attraction. He can maintain active sexuality as long as his body permits. The married man's erotic life typically dies within marriage. What started as passion becomes routine obligation, or disappears entirely. The sensual richness of existence gets replaced by domestic routine. The unmarried man continues experiencing life's passionate dimensions, while the married man resigns himself to their loss. The psychological freedom from others' judgments shapes daily experience profoundly. Nietzsche wrote extensively about how the opinions of the herd constrain individual excellence. The unmarried man, having already defied social expectation by remaining unmarried, is somewhat liberated from caring what others think. He's already failed the conventional test. This frees him to pursue excellence on his own terms, without worrying about social approval. The married man is still invested in maintaining social standing, both for himself and his family. He has to care what others think because his children's social position depends on it. This need for approval constrains his choices and drains his energy. Nietzsche believed that the greatest human beings were those who could affirm life fully, despite its suffering and meaninglessness. The unmarried man often achieves this affirmation more completely than the married man, because his suffering is self-chosen, rather than imposed. He's chosen a harder path in some ways, accepting loneliness and social judgment, rather than taking the easy route of conventional family life. But because he's chosen it, he can affirm it. The married man's suffering is different. It came from following the herd, from doing what he was supposed to do. It's harder to affirm suffering that you didn't consciously choose, that came from weakness rather than strength. The creative output possible in an unmarried life spans broader range and greater depth. Nietzsche himself was unmarried and produced philosophical works of enduring significance. The unmarried man can dedicate himself to creative projects with the intensity they require. He can work for years on something that might fail. He can chase visions that married men must abandon as impractical. History's creative achievements are disproportionately produced by unmarried individuals, because creation requires freedom from distraction and constraint. The married man trying to create while managing family produces inferior work or gives up entirely. The unmarried man can pursue excellence without compromise. The environmental sovereignty available to the unmarried man affects consciousness in subtle but profound ways. Nietzsche understood that environment shapes thought. The unmarried man's home is designed entirely for his purposes. Every element supports his goals and reflects his values. Walking into his space energizes rather than depletes him. The married man's home is compromise space that nobody fully loves. Walking in means entering negotiated territory rather than personal sanctuary. Over decades, living in spaces that restore you versus spaces that drain you creates massive differences in mental health and productivity. Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming requires that you actually overcome previous versions of yourself, rather than just accumulating years. The unmarried man can become genuinely different over time. At 30, he pursues certain goals. At 40, he's transformed and pursuing different ones. At 50, he's someone new again. This continued evolution is what Nietzsche meant by higher humanity. The married man typically doesn't evolve. He becomes more entrenched in his role. At 50, he's just an older, more tired version of his 30-year-old self. The capacity for genuine transformation differs enormously based on whether your life structure permits reinvention. The financial accumulation possible in an unmarried life creates options that translate to freedom. Nietzsche understood power, and money is a form of power. The unmarried man building wealth on modest income achieves financial independence that married men earning far more never reach. By middle age, the unmarried man often has "fuck you" money, enough that he never has to accept treatment he doesn't want or jobs he doesn't like. The married man earning twice as much has no such cushion, because everything gets consumed by family expenses. The power differential this creates affects every negotiation, every opportunity, every choice. One man has options, the other has obligations. Nietzsche's vision of the Ubermensch included the idea of giving style to one's character, crafting yourself into a coherent artistic whole. The unmarried man can achieve this self-sculpting in ways the married man cannot. He can decide what kind of person he wants to become and systematically work toward that ideal. He can develop characteristics and capabilities that serve his vision, rather than what family needs require. The married man doesn't get to decide who he becomes. Family needs dictate his development. If the family needs a steady provider, that's what he becomes, regardless of whether it aligns with his ideal self. The unmarried man is self-sculpted. The married man is externally molded. The relationship with solitude fundamentally differs between these men. Nietzsche valued solitude as necessary for genuine thought and self-development. The unmarried man has abundant solitude and has learned to not just tolerate it, but to use it productively. He's comfortable being alone because he's developed a rich inner life. The married man is rarely alone, and when he is, he's often uncomfortable with it because he hasn't developed the capacity for productive solitude. The unmarried man's comfort with aloneness gives him independence and self-sufficiency that the married man lacks. This shapes everything from negotiations to relationships to daily peace of mind. The legacy question reveals different concepts of meaning and impact. Nietzsche rejected the idea that biological reproduction creates meaningful legacy. The unmarried man who creates works, ideas, institutions, or influences that outlast him creates more enduring legacy than the married man whose children will mostly forget him within decades. The unmarried man can pursue projects of genuine lasting impact because he's not distracted by family maintenance. His legacy is achievement and influence rather than just biology. This creates a different relationship with mortality. One man faces death knowing he influenced the future through his work. The other faces death hoping his children remember him. Nietzsche's concept of noble versus base motivations applies here. The noble individual acts from abundance and power. The base individual acts from resentment and weakness. The unmarried man who chose his path from strength, from recognition that he'd thrive better alone than constrained, acts from nobility. The married man who chose marriage from social pressure or biological drive rather than conscious will often act from base motivation. The difference isn't in the choice itself, but in whether it came from power or weakness. Some men choose marriage from strength, genuinely wanting it, but many choose it from weakness, from inability to face life alone. The unmarried man demonstrates strength through his willingness to stand alone. The physical bearing and presence of the unmarried man often commands unconscious respect. Nietzsche understood that people respond to power and vitality. The unmarried man who maintains himself well projects power that others instinctively defer to. His posture, his energy, his confidence all communicate someone who has mastered himself and his circumstances. The married man often projects defeat, even when successful by conventional measures. His energy is depleted. His posture shows burden. People unconsciously treat him as less powerful because he appears less powerful. The unmarried man walks through life commanding respect without demanding it. The intellectual independence possible in unmarried life allows genuine philosophy rather than rationalization. Nietzsche valued honest thinking over comfortable beliefs. The unmarried man can think honestly about relationships, marriage, family, society, because his life doesn't depend on particular conclusions. He can arrive at uncomfortable truths and live according to them. The married man has to rationalize his choices. He can't honestly examine whether marriage was a good decision because the psychological cost would be too high. This intellectual honesty versus motivated reasoning creates different relationships with truth itself. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence becomes a practical test. Would you live this exact life again? The unmarried man living well can say yes enthusiastically. Every morning is his own. Every choice reflects his will. Every day builds toward goals he actually values. Repeating this forever would be acceptable because it's genuinely good. The married man often cannot pass this test. Would he really want to live through the same compromises, the same constraints, the same slow erosion of self? His honest answer is usually no, though he'd rarely admit it even to himself. This difference in whether you'd enthusiastically repeat your life reveals whether you're living authentically. The social dynamics reveal another dimension of kingly bearing. The unmarried man enters social situations as a complete unit. He's not representing anyone or managing anyone else's image. He can speak his mind without worrying about consequences for dependence. He can form alliances based purely on genuine connection rather than social positioning for family benefit. This creates more authentic relationships and allows him to build networks based on real affinity rather than strategic family positioning. The married man's social interactions are always partially strategic, always filtered through family needs. This creates shallower connections and more performative interactions. Nietzsche believed that the highest individuals would eventually stand alone, separate from the herd. The unmarried man embodies this separation. He's proven his willingness to walk a path most people fear, to prioritize his own development over social approval, to become who he is rather than what others expect. This separateness creates both loneliness and excellence. The married man remains part of the herd, following conventional paths, achieving conventional outcomes. The separation the unmarried man accepts is the price of excellence and authenticity. Nietzsche would recognize this as noble rather than deficient. The capacity for joy available to the unmarried man exceeds what the burdened married man typically experiences. Nietzsche celebrated joy and affirmation of life. The unmarried man can experience pure joy because his pleasures are uncompromised by guilt or obligation. He can enjoy a perfect meal, a beautiful sunset, an engaging conversation fully and completely. The married man's pleasures are usually shadowed by things he should be doing instead, by family needs he's temporarily escaping. His joy is contaminated by awareness of neglected obligations. The purity of the unmarried man's joy comes from owing nothing to anyone, from being exactly where he chooses to be at every moment. Everything we've examined points to a fundamental truth that Nietzsche understood, and that society tries desperately to obscure. The man who remains unmarried and builds his life consciously walks through existence with a sovereignty, a vitality, a power that married men can barely remember possessing. He's not better in some moral sense. He's freer in every practical sense. That freedom translates to power, and that power is visible in how he carries himself, how he makes decisions, how he experiences each day. The kingly bearing isn't affectation. It's the natural expression of someone who owns his own life completely. You've made it through this entire exploration, which means you're someone who values truth over comforting illusions. Drop a comment saying, "I choose sovereignty." The 3 words that acknowledge everything we've discussed, that signal your understanding that there are ways of living that create genuine power rather than just comfortable servitude. Your comment builds community among men who think independently rather than following herd mentality. This matters because every voice speaking truth makes it easier for others to question the narratives they've been sold about what they're supposed to want. Subscribe and hit that like button, because this channel exists to reveal truths that mainstream culture actively suppresses. Every subscription demonstrates demand for honest analysis of masculine existence, for examination of paths less traveled, for recognition that the script society hands us might not lead where we actually want to go. You're not just supporting content. You're supporting a conversation about living authentically rather than conventionally, about pursuing power and excellence rather than comfort and approval. What's coming in the next video will challenge everything you think you know about the fundamental relationship between men and women. The dynamics I'm about to reveal operate constantly, but remain invisible to most people because seeing them clearly would disrupt too many comfortable illusions. The principles I'll share explain patterns you've observed throughout your life, but couldn't quite articulate. People who understand these mechanisms navigate relationships with a clarity and effectiveness that seems almost supernatural to those still operating in darkness. Make absolutely certain you're subscribed, because missing this next piece would leave you with an incomplete map of reality, and that's a disadvantage you cannot afford.